Good morning. I regret that I am not able to be there with you in person. I am unfortunately in Alabama right now doing a medical school interview for UAB. But that being said, today is my day to present, so I'm here with you via video recording. And I'm going to be discussing with you the rise of Islamism, which covered Westadt's pages 288 to 299 and Boot's Invisible Armies, chapters 58 through 60. And the major events that we covered was the Iranian Revolution, events occurring in Egypt and Lebanon, and the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization specifically. So I want to start real quick with the Iranian Revolution and kind of give you a backdrop. And it's important to start here because the Iranian Revolution represents a watershed. It represents the codification of a new international movement which seeks to impose its vision, its ideology upon other countries, upon other nations, and unite peoples. And that ideology is Islamism. So let's begin. Iran under Mohammad Reza Shah and the Pahlavi dynasty in general was dedicated toward modernization. That regime was dedicated towards self-government of Iran. If you look at Iranian history, right after World War I, even before World War I, then into World War II, Iran, although never colonized, was dominated by Russia, Britain, and then later the United States. And that caused a lot of resentment within certain sectors of the population, particularly the clerical elite. After the Shah was reintroduced to power, after the Green Revolution, where Mossadegh briefly came in and then was put out, Mohammad Reza Shah wanted to institute a program of reform where Iran would truly modernize, and this is known as the White Revolution, or in Persian, Enqilab-i Safid. And under this program, he wanted a diversification of the economy, land reform, and education of rural areas, and also a turn towards a more U.S.-styled state, and that meant the emancipation of women. And a lot of these reforms, although, in my opinion, and I am biased, I'm a product of the West, was good for Iran, it distanced the state from basically the clerical elite. And the clerical elite, that's important. It's important to consider who they are and what they stand for. Traditionally within Iranian politics, they have always held a special place within the political structure of the Iranian state. To discount them is to discount Iranian history in totality. The main actor against the Shah's reform was Ayatollah Khomeini. And Ayatollah Khomeini was a skilled politician as much as he was a clerical elite. He was educated in the holy city of Qom, and he attained what's called ijtihad, which basically means that he is infallible when he speaks about religious jurisprudence. And I say he's skilled because unlike other clerics who refused to associate themselves with leftists or with other sort of movements that were against the Shah's regime, Ayatollah Khomeini kept quiet. He didn't distance himself from other opposition groups. In fact, he sought to unify with those groups. And when the moment was right, he ended up hijacking the revolution, creating the Islamic Republic that we see today. There were a lot of U.S. misconceptions about the Ayatollah's motives for instigating a revolution within Iran. They viewed the left as the primary threat to the Pahlavi dynasty, not the Islamic clerical elite. And the reason why the United States cared about Iran was because they saw Iran as the bulwark against communism within the region. In the 70s, we were greater allies with Iran than we were with Israel. We supplied Iran with weapons, with training, with funding, and we bought a lot of their oil, which the Shah used to propagate his programs. Now, in the 70s, along with the discontent from the clerics, you start to see a discontent within a lot of strata within Iran, because a lot of the aspects of the White Revolution contributed to economic stagnation. And that created a large mass of unemployed young people, and unemployed young people in any country is usually bad news. The Shah was made out to be a puppet of the United States, by the clerical elite and also by other segments within Iranian society. And this was not held by the Carter administration. Jimmy Carter didn't have a very good understanding of foreign relations and especially of Iran in general. I mean, in January 1978, at the heat of discontent with the Shah's rule and the claim that he is a puppet of the United States, President Carter goes to Iran and starts talking about how Iran is such a great friend of the United States and how there's a very strong partnership, and that alienates the Shah further. You start to see demonstrations in 1978, and then in December of 1978, the Shah's government falls. Now, it's important that, when we're looking at these events, that the religious aspect of the revolution is already present from day one. And it solidifies itself during those protests in January, September, and then finally in December 1978 with the Million Man March in Tehran. This Million Man March takes place during Ashura, which is one of the holiest days in the Shia tradition, and it basically symbolizes how Shia Muslims have always been the object of oppression. So basically they co-opted the oppression that Shias have historically felt they were the victims of with the current oppression certain segments of the Iranian population felt the Shah was propagating against them. Now, when the revolution succeeds, it is immediately hijacked by Ayatollah Khomeini, who gets rid of other aspects of the revolution, especially this is where he comes out strongly against secular movements. And this is important because at first, the Soviet Union thought, the revolution will occur and then eventually leftists will gain power. But those thoughts were sadly dismayed when Ayatollah Khomeini went about filling mass graves with leftists. So that plan sort of got shot in the water. Now, let's look at how this exports itself into sort of a broader context. When Ayatollah Khomeini assumes power, he states that the Islamic Revolution is not just a revolution within Iran, but a revolution within the entire Muslim world. And he starts to sponsor guerrilla movements within other countries, particularly Lebanon. If you Google the IRGC, which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, they're supposed to uphold the revolution. You Google their coat of arms and you Google Hezbollah, which is in Lebanon, their coat of arms. The coat of arms are extremely similar. There's a fist holding up an AK-47 and a reference to Allah and oppression. And this is going to start to segue into my discussion about Lebanon and the PLO. So with Lebanon, Hezbollah rises to power, and it represents an alternative for the Lebanese, an alternative for confessional politics. No longer do the Shia have to play the game of confessional politics that was imposed on them by the French during their colonial period, or rather their mandate period, as it was termed in the Middle East, was basically colonialism. And you see the rise of this group, and this group starts to it has a lot of similarities with leftist insurgent movements in the fact that they provide social welfare programs, they take care of healthcare, they take care of education, but they're not doing it off of a Marxist platform. They're doing it because it's their duty as Muslims to provide those services to them. Now, we've talked about sort of the Shia aspects. I want to turn your attention really quickly to the Sunni aspects. And the Sunni concept of jihad and of international involvement takes form when the Soviets invade Afghanistan. And the Soviets, like the Americans in Vietnam, didn't really understand what they were getting themselves into, or Afghan politics. They saw Afghanistan as a nation state, which is flawed. Afghanistan is made up of Pashtuns, Uzbeks, Hazaras, Tajiks, a whole mess of different ethnicities that are sort of confined into this region that has just been unable to be controlled by various empires, whether the British, the Russians in the 80s, and the United States currently. With Afghanistan, you provide a battleground, you provide a way for training for Sunni extremism, and a lot of this is funded by Saudi Arabia. They become sort of the bankrollers of Sunni movements throughout the Arab world. They see this as their way of imposing Wahhabi Islam, which is also a revolutionary concept. It really didn't see codification until the late 18th century, the 19th century, under the rise of the House of Saud. But with Afghanistan, you see the export of this ideology. Now, with the time, it's 9-minute presentation. I'm going to wrap this up real quick for you. when we look at Westadt's thesis, going back to Iran, we see that the thesis for him is that the Iranian Revolution provides the codification of an alternative ideology for international campaigns. So no longer is it communism and capitalism, period, end of story, but there's also Islamism, which can be targeted to any Muslim country. And this gives you a sort of geographical region from Morocco in the west all the way to Indonesia in the east. It basically spans North Africa, the Middle East, down to South Asia, and then out to Southeast Asia. It's an Islamic belt, and it encompasses a very, very, very great volume of peoples. So that's Westadt's thesis. With Booth's thesis, it's basically that American interventionism and then Russian interventionism helped Islamism become a threat to both regimes rather than trying to suffice the aims of both powers and sort of, getting rid of the other. My questions to you is, first and foremost, what is the benefit in understanding sort of the cultural background of these countries that we engage with, especially since we're engaged with Middle Eastern countries? What's the importance of understanding that cultural background in order to understand the rise of Islamism? Can the West ever come to a agreement with Islamism? And then finally, one of the points that I would like you as a class to discuss is, can Islamism ever be wiped out from the Middle East? Or is it a specter that we are going to be dealing with for basically the rest of time? I thank you very much for listening to this presentation. I will send out, or Major Romanensky will send out, a link to a YouTube video where I discuss the Islamic Revolution in more detail if you would like to see that. But with the time constraints that I have on me, I want to end it right here and let the class devolve into discussion. If there are any other sort of questions that you have over this topic, I'll be more than happy to answer them for you in the next lesson. Again, I wish I could be there, but unfortunately, with my interview schedule, I am not able to. Thank you very much for your time and listening to this video, and have a wonderful class discussion.